My name is Sophie. I'm 27. And if you met me today, confident, organized, well-spoken, you might assume I've always been like this. But the truth is, I grew into the woman I am now the way some people learn to swim. Desperately, gasping, afraid they won't make it to the other side. I wasn't raised to take up space, not really. I was the kind of kid who got gold stars for being quiet, who never raised her voice, who said, "I'm sorry," even when she wasn't sure what she'd done wrong. I got good grades, but not the kind that drew attention. I was careful with people. Careful not to be too much of anything. Too loud, too needy, too opinionated. I think for a while I believed that if I stayed small and agreeable, I'd be loved. That being low maintenance would earn me a kind of safety. After college, I landed a junior marketing role at a tech company. Nothing glamorous, small office, chipped mugs, meetings that could have been emails. But it was a foot in the door. I worked hard, stayed late, didn't complain when I was passed over for things. I was 21 and I thought paying my dues meant being invisible. That was the year I met Ron. We were introduced at a mutual friend's housewarming. He was 5 years older and ran his own business, small scale, niche, something to do with customized high-performance bike parts. I didn't really understand the technical side of it, but he talked about it with this spark in his eyes. He had a restless kind of energy, the kind that made you feel like standing still was a waste of time. People naturally gravitated toward him. He knew how to fill a room, how to command it without being overbearing. And when he talked to you, it felt like you were the only person in the world. I remember thinking he was everything I wasn't. Bold, driven, magnetic. And yet, when he asked for my number, I thought maybe he saw something in me no one else had. We started dating not long after. In the early days, everything felt electric. He'd pick me up in his beat-up Jeep that smelled faintly of engine oil and leather, and we'd grab late-night ramen or sneak into rooftop bars we had no business being in. He'd talk about his business plans, his goals, his frustration with people who thought too small. I admired that about him, that clarity, that hunger. I think he liked that I listened. I asked questions. I believed in what he was building, even when it meant skipped dates or canceled plans. I wanted to be supportive. I wanted to be what he needed. Looking back, maybe that was the first red flag, not who he was, but how easily I molded myself to fit into his life. I thought that's what love meant, that devotion looked like sacrifice, that being there meant putting my own needs on pause. Ron had ambition, no doubt, but what he didn't have was structure. He flew by instinct, by charm. He'd skip bookkeeping for months, forget to invoice clients, push deadlines until they snapped. I helped where I could, not because he asked, but because I thought, if I make myself useful, he won't let me go. I built him a simple website from scratch after watching hours of free tutorials. I wrote marketing copy, answered emails, even called vendors when he double booked himself. I wasn't a business partner, officially, but it sure felt like I was becoming one. I didn't resent it, at least not then. I felt proud, like we were building something together, even if my name wasn't on anything. Outside of the business, we were good. Or so I thought. He wasn't particularly affectionate, but I told myself he was just tired. He wasn't great with words, but I told myself that actions mattered more. He didn't ask much about my job, but I figured it was because he was focused on his. The excuses came easily. Too easily. When I got a small promotion at work, I remember texting him the news with way too many exclamation points. His reply was, "Nice, proud of you." I stared at that message for a long time, unsure why it stung. But I brushed it off. I always brushed it off. We moved in together after a year, a modest apartment with mismatched furniture and a leaky faucet. I paid a little more toward rent. He said his money was tied up in business costs, but I didn't mind. He'd bring me coffee in bed on weekends and tell me we were going places. That one day, we'd laugh about how broke we used to be. I believed him. I really, truly believed him. And I loved him. So when everything eventually shattered, I wasn't ready. Not even a little, but that part, that's for another time. The cracks didn't appear all at once. They showed up like hairline fractures, easy to miss if you weren't looking for them. I wasn't. I was too busy convincing myself we were still solid. Ron started coming home later. First, it was one night a week, then two, then almost every day. Always the same excuse. Client meetings, late shipments, supplier problems. He was stressed, I told myself. Business was growing, and with growth came pressure. I wanted to be understanding. I wanted to be patient. But slowly, something shifted in the air between us. It wasn't just distance, it was disinterest. He stopped noticing small things, like the time I cut my hair, a big change too, not a trim, and he didn't say a word. Or when I got sick and he left me alone in bed all day because he had to take a call. His voice changed too, less warmth, more clipped, distracted replies. But every time I tried to bring it up, he'd say I was being dramatic, or worse, needy. I started to feel like I was bothering him just by existing in his space. And then came Claire. I didn't know her name at first. I only knew the signs. Long blonde hairs on the passenger seat, the faint smell of unfamiliar perfume on his collar, a softness in his eyes that no longer turned in my direction. He didn't cheat in secret. He faded out like a light bulb slowly dying, sawing, leaving me squinting in the dim, trying to convince myself there was still warmth there. The night he finally said it, "We need to talk," I already knew. We sat across from each other in that apartment we'd made a home out of, surrounded by our secondhand furniture and shared memories. His tone was casual, too casual, like he was announcing a scheduling conflict, not detonating everything we'd built. "I've met someone," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "She's younger, she just gets me, you know?" I remember staring at him, not blinking. My brain froze, trying to protect me from hearing what I was hearing. "You're great, Sophie. You are. But Claire's different. She's fun. She's alive." Alive. As if I were dead weight he'd been dragging through the golden glow of his success. He packed a duffel bag that night. He said he'd be back for the rest of his stuff later, and I nodded like a mannequin. I don't even remember closing the door after him. I just remember the silence, the kind that fills your ears until your own heartbeat feels like an alarm. For days I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I kept replaying our conversations in my head, looking for the moment I failed him. What did Claire have that I didn't? What had I done wrong? The answers never came, only time did. And with time came rage, not the loud, dramatic kind. Mine was quieter, smoldering, productive. I dragged myself to work even when my skin felt too tight from holding back tears. I took every assignment, spoke up in meetings, learned to say no, to negotiate, to hold my ground. If Ron had made me feel replaceable, I was going to make myself irreplaceable somewhere else. That year, I was promoted twice. At first, I used my success like a weapon. "Look what you lost," I wanted to scream. But slowly, it became something else. Something just for me. I moved out of that apartment and into a new place with real sunlight and my own furniture. No hand-me-downs, no shared history. I filled the walls with things that made me happy. Soft colors, plants I remembered to water, shelves full of books I finally had time to read. And I started dating again. Cautiously, with boundaries. I told myself I wouldn't lose myself in someone again, that I wouldn't shrink to make someone else feel tall. And I meant it. Until I met Daniel. He didn't sweep in with fireworks. He showed up with consistency, with questions, with real listening. On our third date, I told him about Ron. Not the whole story, just enough. He didn't flinch, just reached for my hand and said, "You don't have to prove anything here." That's when I knew. We got married last fall in a quiet ceremony in the woods. Just family and a few close friends. It wasn't extravagant, but it was honest. It felt like arriving home after a long, messy journey. I thought I'd closed the chapter on Ron, but then a few months after our wedding, I ran into someone who used to work with him. "Have you heard?" she asked, eyes wide. "About Ron?" I hadn't, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. But curiosity, well, it has a way of cracking doors you thought were shut for good. We were standing in line at a coffee shop when she brought it up. Ron's former accountant, oddly enough. A quiet woman named Lisa, who had always seemed a little too tightly wound when we used to cross paths. We hadn't seen each other in years, and her bringing up his name was so unexpected, it made my breath catch, just for a second. I gave her a polite shrug, something non-committal. No, I haven't heard anything in a long time. We're not in touch. Lisa hesitated, the way people do when they know they're holding something dramatic and are trying to decide whether to drop it into your lap. And of course, she did. She always would. Well, the business went under. I blinked. Not because I was shocked, somewhere deep down I'd expected it would eventually, but because hearing it said out loud was like walking into a room I thought had been demolished long ago. He didn't keep up with payments, she continued. Took out too many short-term loans. When the market shifted, he didn't adapt. Burned through cash fast and with no cushion. He was always too confident the next big client would save him. I nodded slowly. I knew that version of Ron too well, the gambler with no cards, bluffing his way into yet another round. He's not doing great, she added, lowering her voice even though no one was listening. Claire left him about 6 months ago. Took everything she could. Apparently she met someone else, real estate developer or something. Ron's renting out a room in some guy's basement now. It's sad. Sad. I don't know what she expected me to say. Maybe to gloat? Maybe to show some trace of heartbreak, some flicker of unresolved feelings. But all I felt was this odd, crystalline stillness. No vindication, no bitterness, just a kind of quiet understanding that the story had completed its arc without me needing to touch it. Thanks for telling me, I said simply, and that was the end of it. I walked home with my coffee, thinking about how different my life had become. Not because of Ron's downfall, but because I'd finally stopped chasing people who saw me as a placeholder for something better. I had built a life from the ashes of that heartbreak, a life that didn't depend on someone else's approval or attention. And still, I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a flicker of justice in it. Not the cinematic kind, not the over-the-top revenge people expect when they hear a story like mine. No grand confrontations, no mic drops, just gravity doing its work. Ron had always thought he was untouchable, that charm could replace substance, that someone like Claire would stay as long as he looked successful, as long as he kept upgrading. But he forgot something essential. Some people don't love you. They love the way you reflect the life they think they want. And when that shine fades, so do they. Meanwhile, I stopped trying to be a mirror for someone else's ambition and started being the source of my own light. Daniel saw that in me and loved me not in spite of my past, but because of what I had become through it. I never responded to Ron, never reached out. He became a story I used to tell myself, one that no longer required rewriting or understanding. Just a chapter I turned from. And honestly, I'm glad he left. Not because of what happened to him, but because of what happened to me afterward. I didn't just move on, I grew up. And I grew out of the space he once held in my life until there wasn't even a trace of it left. A few months after that coffee shop encounter, I stumbled upon an old photo of Ron and me while I was reorganizing boxes in our hallway closet. It was tucked into a folder labeled Receipts and Random Stuff. How fitting. We were sitting on the hood of his Jeep, arms around each other, half drunk on cheap wine and youth. I looked at my own face and hardly recognized the girl in the picture. She was trying so hard. Smiling just a little wider than necessary, shoulder turned in like she was protecting something fragile. Ron, of course, looked effortlessly relaxed. His eyes weren't on me in the photo. They were somewhere out beyond the camera, distracted. Even then, I sat on the floor with that photo in my hands, and something surprising happened. I laughed. Not a bitter laugh, not even a sad one. Just a soft, genuine laugh at how far I'd come. How ridiculous it all seemed now, and how if I could somehow reach back in time and whisper in that girl's ear, I would say, "You don't have to try so hard. One day, he'll be nothing but a blurry image in a dusty file." Because that's what he is now. A ghost from a life that feels like it belonged to someone else. And while it's tempting to say he got what he deserved, the truth is, I don't care about punishment. I care about freedom. And I've built mine piece by piece. After that day, I started noticing how little space he occupied in my thoughts. There were whole weeks, months even, when his name didn't cross my mind once, not out of suppression or avoidance, but because other things had taken root. Real things, solid things, a life that was finally mine. Daniel and I had just celebrated our first wedding anniversary. We didn't throw a big party, we didn't need to. We took a weekend trip to a small cabin near a lake, just the two of us, and spent our time cooking simple meals, reading by the fire, and talking, really talking, without phones or distractions. One night, curled up under a blanket on the porch, I told him about the photo, about how I used to carry that relationship like a wound that wouldn't close. Daniel didn't say much. He just pulled me a little closer and said, "You don't owe your past anything." And it stuck with me, because for years I thought I did. I thought I owed Ron closure or forgiveness or some kind of internal reconciliation. But I didn't. I owed myself peace. And that's what I had finally found. Ron's collapse didn't bring me joy. But it did bring clarity. It showed me the difference between a man who builds an empire on appearances and a man who builds a life with you, brick by brick, hand in hand. Daniel doesn't make grand promises. He doesn't light up a room the way Ron did. But he shows up. Every day. With steady hands, with kindness, with respect. And when I'm with him, I don't have to shrink or smile harder or earn my place. I just am. And maybe that's the most radical love of all. In the months that followed, I did hear bits and pieces about Ron's life unraveling. He tried launching a new version of his business, but the trust just wasn't there anymore. Too many burned bridges. He took on a few side hustles, consulting, flipping used cars, but nothing stuck. Friends drifted. The glamour peeled away. And from what I heard, he never quite figured out how to start over without someone to catch him when he fell. I never said a word. Never posted a sly quote online or sent a passive-aggressive text. That wasn't the story I wanted to tell anymore. Instead, I started focusing on what I could build. I launched a small passion project, a mentorship group for young women starting out in creative careers. It was something I'd wished for when I was struggling. Now I had the tools, the experience, and most importantly, the confidence to offer it to others. Watching those women find their voice reminded me how far I'd come from the version of myself who was afraid to speak up in a meeting. I sometimes wonder if Ron ever thinks about me, if he remembers the way I used to stay up editing his product descriptions, or the time I drove across town just to drop off a forgotten hard drive before a pitch meeting. Probably not. Men like Ron tend to forget the help that came without applause. But that's okay, because remember. And that memory no longer hurts. It feels like looking at a scar, faint, smooth, a little raised under your fingertips. A reminder that something once broke you, but you healed anyway. I keep that photo in a box, not out of sentiment, but as a quiet monument to what I survived, what I outgrew, what I walked away from, not with vengeance, but with grace. Sometimes justice doesn't come with fireworks. Sometimes it's a whisper, a steady heartbeat, a quiet house filled with love, a laugh you didn't think you'd ever laugh again. And sometimes justice looks like waking up next to someone who chooses you. Every day, without question, without games, without needing you to prove your worth. That's where I live now, and there's not a single part of me that would trade it. Not for Ron, not for what we had, not even for the version of myself who once thought he was everything. Because the truth is, I lost something when he left. But I found everything else. It's strange how the mind can hold on to certain moments, as if they were imprinted deeper than others. Sometimes I wonder why I still remember the way Ron used to tap his thumb against the steering wheel when he was deep in thought, or the exact tone of his voice when he said "babe" without thinking. These memories surface at the oddest times, when I'm folding laundry or choosing tomatoes at the grocery store or brushing my teeth before bed. But the feelings that used to come with those memories, the tightness in my chest, the sting of not being enough, they're gone. It's like looking through a window into someone else's life, a younger woman's life, one I've long since outgrown. A few weeks ago, I ran into him. It was at a gas station, of all places. I'd just come from a weekend visit with my parents. Daniel was working late and couldn't join, so I'd driven down solo. I stopped for coffee and fuel on the way back. It was a quiet Sunday evening, the kind where time feels slow and the air smells faintly of pavement and trees. I was humming to myself, keys in hand, when I looked up. And there he was. Ron. standing near pump 6, wrestling with the handle, cursing under his breath because the card reader wasn't working. His car, a dusty, dented black sedan that looked about a decade older than anything he used to drive, sat behind him like a metaphor. He hadn't seen me yet. I had a few seconds to just observe. He looked older. Not in the natural way, but in the tired way. That kind of aging that happens when you've been burned too many times by your own choices. His clothes were wrinkled. Not stylish wrinkled, just unkempt. His shoulders were slumped in a way I never remembered. And his hair, once so carefully styled, was cut unevenly, like he'd done it himself or couldn't afford a decent barber. I could have walked away, but I didn't. Maybe some small, unresolved piece of me wanted to look him in the eye. Maybe I just wanted to see if he'd recognize me, who I was now, not who I'd been. He turned around just as I was walking toward the door of the gas station, and for a moment we locked eyes. There was a flicker of recognition, then something more. Hesitation. Embarrassment. A flicker of pride trying to put itself together, but failing halfway through. "Sophie," he said with a cautious half-smile. "Hey, Ron," I replied calmly, almost warmly. I surprised myself with how easy it was to say. "You look good," he added, eyes scanning me with a mixture of nostalgia and disbelief. "It's been a while." "It has," I said, not offering anything further. I didn't owe him updates. "How have you been?" he asked, fidgeting with his keys. "I've been well," I said, nodding. "Really well." There was an awkward pause. I didn't fill it. He cleared his throat, eyes darting toward his car. "Business stuff's been rough." I nodded, not in sympathy, but in understanding. "I heard." He didn't ask how. He didn't ask what I'd heard. I think part of him knew that people talk, and that his story had stopped being impressive a long time ago. There was another silence, then with a sort of sad bravado, he asked, "You still with that guy?" "Daniel, right?" I smiled. "Married, actually, last year." He swallowed hard. "That's good. He seems like a good guy." "He is," I said, and I meant it. Ron nodded slowly, like he was playing out every version of this interaction in his head, none of which ended with him looking quite so small. "I guess I messed things up, huh?" I didn't answer right away. I didn't want to make him feel worse, but I also wasn't there to ease his conscience. "You made choices," I said finally, "and I made mine." He looked at me like he wanted to say more. Maybe apologize, maybe explain, maybe beg for a second chance at something that had already turned to ash. But I didn't give him the space. "I should go," I said, lifting my coffee cup. "Long drive ahead." He nodded again. "Right, yeah, it was good to see you, Soph." I offered him a polite smile. "Take care of yourself, Ron." And that was it. I walked away feeling nothing heavy. No triumph. No regret. Just a clear, clean sense of closure. Not the kind you chase for years. The kind that comes when you finally see things as they are. When the person who once broke you is just a man struggling with a gas pump and a life that didn't go the way he planned. Back in the car, I texted Daniel. "On my way. Miss you." He replied instantly, "Drive safe. Can't wait to see you." I turned on the radio and drove home with the windows cracked, letting the spring air fill the car. Sometimes, when I tell this story, people expect more. A dramatic twist, a cruel revenge, a moment of humiliation for him. But that's not how life works. Real justice doesn't always look like a headline. Sometimes it's quiet, internal, a shift in the axis of your heart. Ron hurt me once, deeply. But he also taught me what love isn't. And that knowledge, that hard-earned clarity, it's worth more than any apology he could ever offer. I don't think of him often now. When I do, it's with the same feeling I have when I pass an old school I used to attend, a strange blend of familiarity and distance. I know I was there once, but I don't belong there anymore. I belong here, in this life I built, with Daniel, with peace, with no shadows trailing me. And that is enough. That is everything.